Joining today. We've got an awesome group, and we're going to be talking about risk and custody and how you can be confident that if you're relying on someone else to safeguard your assets, that they are doing it safely and securely. And custody is a very, I'd say, difficult thing to do. There's a lot of different issues that come up with it, and there are a lot of gaps that we need to make sure people are questioning. So in this session, we're just going to focus on the practical side of security and what questions you should be asking to identify risk and if you should be using a custody or service provider or not. And I'm Jessica Levesque. I'm the executive director. Just to start off and remind everyone that the opinions of everyone on this call are their own and it's not necessarily reflective of their employers. So let's start with introductions. Andrew, do you want to get started?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jessica. So hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Changu. I am a principal cybersecurity consultant at Mandiant, which is now part of Google Cloud. So in my day job, I help companies, large and small, improve their cybersecurity defenses, including Web3 firms. And yeah, once again, the opinions expressed here are my own. I'm not representing Google today, but we'll be talking about lots of interesting topics in the Web3 space, particularly in the crypto custody space. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Andrew. Sharnay?
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Sharnay van Heerden. I am head of audit at Provenance. We are a digital asset compliance firm. We touch a bit on TradFi as well. A lot of compliance-related services, but we are mainly focused on, or my service line, on internal audits for the digital asset space and then also cryptocurrency security audits. Also, happy to be here. This third-party risk management is a topic that I'm quite passionate about, and I'll probably cringe if I rewatch this live stream.
That's like the worst part about recording in general is when you ever have to go back and look at it. It's humbling, always. Mark?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Christianis. I'm the Associate Director of Six Blocks Audit. We basically audit Web3 platforms for cybersecurity worldwide. And no, it's going to be an interesting session.
Awesome. Phil?
Hey, everybody. My name is Phil Moran. I'm CEO at DigOp. We work with asset managers and allocators focused on digital assets, on questions of like vendor selection, operational due diligence for their counterparties. Again, all focused on digital assets. And we also engage directly with service providers for audits and evaluations of their operation to get them up to speed for engaging with clients.
Awesome. And we were also going to have Dirk Anderson, our CCSS committee chair, but he's under the weather. So if you saw him on the promos, that's why he's not here with us today. But we have got an incredible group of experts here. So let's start to get into some of the questions that we should be asking when we're doing due diligence. So if you are an investor or you work in a family office or you're any type of executive in the cryptocurrency space, you should really have an idea of what you should be looking for when you choose a wallet provider, a custodian, or anyone that is participating in your crypto custody. So what questions should we be asking? Sharnay, do you want to get us started on and kind of orient us on what the perspective should be when we look to beginning to ask these questions?
Yes, definitely, Jessica. I think this is something that has been coming up more in practice, definitely what I've been seeing. And what I've also been noticing is that operational due diligence or counterparty due diligence is more being seen as a compliance checkbox and not necessarily a risk-based approach, which is actually the main goal there is to mitigate your key risk. So before we jump into the specific questions, what I would like to highlight is that it's really about understanding your specific risk and tailoring the questions to the role and criticality of each vendor or service provider or counterparty, how they fit into your operations, what are you using them for. So because if your due diligence questionnaire, if it never changes by vendor type or by entity, then it's not being risk-based and it's not meeting the goal that it should be meeting. So, but yeah, would like to hear about everybody on the call. What are the key questions specifically in this space for custody and wallet service providers that you think we should be asking?
I really like that you started with that, Sharnay, because I think that that's a good point. We can't tell you exactly what questions you should be asking for every system and for every product and service that's offered. This is a way to guide and to figure out what questions you should be, but it's going to shift and change based upon not only the service providers, but also your own risk and their risk. And so there's a lot of, I guess, components to this as a whole. So yeah, I like that. Mark, do you want to start the conversation, or I guess take it further to what kind of red flags we're talking about with risk?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the key thing here is that there's probably a lot more risk in the Web3 space than, say, in the Web2 space, or what they call the legacy space. This industry, the Web3 industry, is still in startup mode when you compare it back to legacy systems and so forth. So there's a lot more due diligence, I think, that's required for Web3 platforms, not only operationally, but also some of the things that don't really travel across Web 2 to Web 3 too well. I think we'll need to look at things such as certifications. You know, what does it mean if there's SOC 2 Type 2? What does it mean if they're ISO 27001 in the Web 3 space? Service providers, like Sharnay said, service providers are a massive bugbear for me as well. I've got major major mental health issues when I deal with service provider management. That seems to be something that's incredibly lacking in this space and needs a really big focus. What I mean by there is that the custody providers own service providers. They're an integral part of this whole thing. So you really need to understand service provider management, what the custody providers are doing there. And, operational stuff, regulations, if there's any red flags coming up from the regulators in terms of blacklisting or warnings that have been issued. And, again, coming back to key management as well. Are they actually looking after the keys that are protecting your funds or even your clients' funds?
I'm glad that you said bugbear already, Mark, because when you started talking about something before, I was like, this is one of his bugbears. And then you brought it up because that is, whoa, sorry if you could hear my dog just got a little upset about the bugbear as well. I'm not sure if it came through on Zoom. Okay, so I totally agree. Does anyone want to jump in and expand on what Mark's been getting into? No? Okay, I will. Or my dog will, I'm not sure. But okay, so if we're looking at kind of like from a high level perspective, what are these major things? So Mark, you talked a little bit about like key management. You talked about the different standards and how they don't all necessarily test or evaluate everything. It is kind of dependent on the system. But do you want to get into the part about SOC 2 and why, if you ask if someone's SOC 2 Type 2, does that, like, do you no longer need to have any concerns?
Yeah, I mean, so SOC 2 is an interesting beast in that if you've ever read a SOC 2 attestation report, you'll see that a lot of the times it's actually very high level, and it only covers some of the key operational activities and governance activities. For example, when I'm auditing for CCSS, the cryptocurrency security standard, you'll often see SOC 2 Type 2 reports presented to you as evidence for the requirement, the level 3 stuff and the security aspect. And often when you look at these reports, these are for Web3 platforms, and there's no mention or no testing procedures related to key management in depth. And it's more, SOC 2 basically should just give you enough assurance that the operational activities, their repeatable processes are in play. But in terms of key management, in terms of the really important stuff from cybersecurity, in my personal opinion, that doesn't cover it at any level. And ISO 27001, again, a much more, probably more relevant standard and certification to cybersecurity in Web3 is that it only covers the baseline security controls, patch management, configuration management, access management, those things. But when you look at something like CCSS, where it actually looks really into the weeds of key management activities, which is, I mean, fundamentally critical for the Web3 space, you'll see that it's often lacking there. And this is why when people do due diligence on custody providers, you shouldn't stop at SOC 2 and ISO 27001. That only gives you the bare minimum assurance that they actually take cybersecurity relatively seriously, but they need to go a step beyond that, and you need to ensure that they're actually looking at certifications that are completely designed for Web3 space. CCSS is a perfect example there. There's other ones like NORS for staking and validators and so forth. So the key message here for you is just because they're SOC 2 and or ISO 27001 does not give you absolute assurance that they're taking key management seriously, which again is the most critical cybersecurity controls that you can have in this space.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note on the other side of it, getting a CCSS audit and certification doesn't protect you for everything. It's both sides of it. I went to a conference a couple months ago and I was talking to a wallet provider and they said, yeah, we've got CCSS on, it's on our plan for 2026. We're going to do that. And then we're looking into SOC 2 and we're going to look into ISO. And I said, whoa, back up. CCSS is not you don't need to do CCSS first. It's not necessarily the most important audit and certification for your company and for your system. So obviously we're on this call, we have all CCSSAs other than myself, but I work for C4. So I'm very passionate about the CCSS, but it's not instead of these other certifications. It's really important to, like you said, Mark, keep doing the patch management and whatnot. And I see everyone else on the call nodding as well. So make sure that it's just because this is a Web3 standard and it's very useful, it's only focused on the key management aspects. So it needs to be a well-rounded approach when you're looking at risk and evaluating how to keep a system or a company secure. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Probably if maybe the panel should have certifications are literally point in time, most of them. So, the auditor comes in, they're on the best behavior, the auditor is satisfied, signs off and so forth, and then disappears for, another 12 months. So maybe we should discuss as a panel about continuous monitoring and improvement.
Yeah, I think that's good. Why don't we get into that? What questions do we ask to see if there is continuous monitoring and improvement and logging, and what are we looking for those answers to be?
Yeah, I can jump in here, Jessica. So again, I come from the traditional cybersecurity space, have over 10 years of experience working in Web 2, cybersecurity roles. And one thing that we always look for to see continuous monitoring and improvement is, show me your last security incident, right? Show me your last security event. How did you respond to that event? And what was the root cause of that event? And what are you doing to make sure that that doesn't happen again, right? If they can't provide you that, and they say, hey, we don't really have a formalized process for, doing a root cause analysis when we do have a security incident. And trust me, if a company tells you that they've never had any sort of security incidents, that just means that they haven't detected them, right? And so having that process of continuous improvement after something goes wrong to prevent it from happening again in the future, that's a good question to ask when you're talking to a custody provider, to make sure that they have those processes in place and that they're constantly improving on their security controls rather than just, they were compliant a year ago. Does anyone else have anything to add there?
Yeah, I
I
think
think
one
you made a
thing,
very good.
oh, sorry, Sharnay, go ahead.
No, no, Philip, go.
Thanks. I was going to add to that. I think also, I mean, Andrew, you brought up great points, and also it's like um, a challenge that I think we found in the Web3 space, I guess just because of its nascency, is also as you're going through, whatever that might be, it's like you said, Andrew, like what's something that happened to you in the past? How did you respond? Or maybe like some other like, SOP is also getting confidence that what they're telling you is legitimate. The what they how they said they responded is true. Um, and that can be kind of tricky because you might not always be relying on you know technical logs necessarily for that, right? Like you might actually be talking to people. And so that can be sort of like a tricky thing to navigate.
Sharnay, jump in.
Uh, Yes, I wanted to say from a bit of my perspective from internal audit, and I don't know how it would look, in the context of CCSS, but generally in that sense, with the internal audit, you write your recommendations. You see maybe a control that can be improved or is severely lacking, but then it's really not about just a quick fix. So how we generally try to or um, approach it is it can take you, depending on what needs to happen for that control to change, it can take 3 months to implement it, it can take a year. But once you say that has been implemented, that's when the clock starts. And then we generally recommend that within 6 months, the auditors go in again to see if it was actually a sustainable control that was implemented. Something that, can go is future proof, can go on, and not just a quick fix for the now. So not sure how it would look in this space, but it's what we do in internal audit.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think often when we realize we should be doing something that we're not, we scramble to make a fix, but it's not necessarily, like you said, Charnay, a sustainable fix. Just because you've fixed something in that moment doesn't mean that it's going to be fixed moving forward. And you need to keep up with the processes and everything that's been put into place. Mark, were you going to add on?
Oh no, I completely agree. Alton, when you're looking at your clients, sometimes it's always good just to find out whether they have quarterly internal reviews themselves. ISO 27001 and I think even maybe SOC 2 will have some type of control about quarterly reviews. And it is important that they test their controls and actually understand if the controls are working as expected throughout the testing period. And so, yeah, Shanae raised a really interesting point there as well. It's a bit hard when from looking from the outside into some of these custody providers, because sometimes they don't really provide you with the type of information you need. But generally, I think you can get a good feel if you just talk to them about, what is your continuous monitoring and improvement program? How do you deal with critical control failures? Those types of things.
Right. And what kind of documentation should we be asking for about this? So I know we said a little bit about like you can ask, sometimes it'll be people referring to it. We talked about logs and proof of continuous monitoring, but what other types of policies or procedures and documentation do you guys ask for or look for or should people ask or look for when they're trying to determine if it's too risky or maybe just moderate risk to work with a provider or to select a custody provider?
Generally, so you often hear about complaints from organizations where they say, but we've got all these certifications, but we still receive a 300-page questionnaire from potential customers or clients. And again, it does come back to these certifications only provide a certain level of assurance, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's every entity's responsibility to go in and actually truly understand what this custody provider is. The key thing here is to mention is that when we're looking at custody providers, we're actually looking at the entities that are going to be protecting your funds or even your customers' funds. So, you should be doing enough due diligence for yourself that you feel comfortable and don't feel that you're asking too many questions, because there's never enough too many questions when it comes to auditing or assessments and risk assessments. Key things that probably would come to mind first is at the fundamental level, have you got an information security policy? Most of the time, they if you're under NDA with the organization, you basically sign an NDA for the custody providers you're evaluating. You ask them about their information security policy. You ask them about audit reports. If there's been any external audit reports being done on them, you ask to see those. Sometimes you can even be asking for pen testing reports. Sometimes a lot of the custody providers will provide that. Things such as key management policies, access management policies, all the high level stuff that you would expect a custody provider to have. They generally probably don't have much of a problem providing those as well. Another thing too, but they won't give it to you, no doubt, but you should ask them a key thing. So for all CCSS auditors, when we train them, when they're actually under a training program to become a CCSS auditor, one of the first things we tell the auditors is to ask them, can you provide a key inventory of your critical keys? Now, coming from the outside, they're not going to give you the key inventory, of course, but you can always say, well, do you keep an inventory of your critical keys? And from there, if they just say blindly yes, you can actually dig in deeper and say, well, does it say who has access to each key? Where are the backups located, and so forth as well? So you can drill in quite a bit. The other things too, I would definitely, if they're using their own types of protocols, like they've created their own MPC protocol and so forth, ask for the code audit reports as well. Some of the stuff can get quite technical, but honestly, if you're dealing with millions of dollars worth of virtual assets and so forth under custody, you really do need to start looking at some of this stuff.
Yeah, and you brought up the key inventory, but there's also a next step to that. And Andrew, did you want to get into, like, you need a key inventory, that's super important, but you also need.
Yeah, that's a great point. Key inventory, great first step, but also make sure to ask them if they have a key compromise policy, right? And that should be part of their overall cybersecurity incident response plan, which they should also have. But when it comes to custody providers, knowing that they have a plan in place if they even suspect a key has been exposed in any sort of way, whether that means that an HSM module has an unpatched vulnerability or anything of that sort. If the integrity of a key is suspected to be exposed, then they should have a plan in place to rotate that key in a way that's safe, right? And that should be in their key compromise policy. And that's probably one of the most important documents to ask for these custody providers.
Yeah, the number of horror shows and horrible things we've heard about when keys go missing and other people don't know what to do. There isn't a plan in place. You want to have that plan before something happens. Phil, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah. Just to adding to what you just said, Andrew, one of the funny nuances of crypto is that if you have to rotate keys and you're a custodian, that probably means you're going to have to sweep all of your clients' assets into these new compliant and safe wallets. And so just from sort of I guess you call it an incentive kind of point of view, there's sort of is this incentive where they might not want to, there's this additional layer. Not only would they have to say hey, these keys were, something happened to them, but also we're going to have to move your funds. And so then it's really in the client's face that, something happened. So there's just these weird, because I come from a very traditional finance background, before I got into crypto. And these are just some of the things that I think that, especially speaking to a family office, an asset manager style audience, these are the things that they, at least, when I was in my traditional finance seat, I would not have necessarily been thinking about that as sort of a derivative action that then had to take place, right? And then like the incentives that puts on top of the service providers.
I wanted to ask Phil, I know you've got something you want to screen share in a little bit. Does it make sense to do that now, or should we talk more about like outsourcing risk and if we can transfer accountability?
Sure.
What order makes sense?
I'm happy to share. I mean, it's really just like a quick kind of some quick data points here, I think, to sort of like frame the problem, that we're talking about here, and that it really is a really big deal.
Mhm.
We This was a few months ago now, maybe about 4 months ago. We compiled data on, excuse me, I'm kind of losing my voice a little bit here while we speak, so hopefully you can hear me. But we compiled data on a few thousand operational loss events in digital assets, and we looked across that operational loss data, and we said, okay, which of these were custody related? We sort of like at a high level group these. What's custody related? What's say smart contract failures and this sort of thing, right? Because I think that generally there's this idea when we think about say operational risk in digital assets, that this is like a question of like a code, where code is like a smart contract. Like that's what we're talking about, not necessarily like how are you using those keys from just like a procedural perspective, right? Who has access to them? Like these sort of more like operational questions. And so when we looked at the data, I'll share my screen, and this is just straight from the article that I'm sharing. So hopefully you can see this here, but this is looking at the I'll show a second chart here in a moment. Looking at the trend in annualized losses coming from just comparing two broad categories: smart contract vulnerabilities. So that's this dark blue line. And then looking at custody related losses, and that's the yellow line. So this is looking at a rolling 1 year window to kind of gauge like what's the trend, like where is this going? And when you look at the trend, so this is a pretty decently long time frame going back to January of 2021. You can see that the smart contract losses have tightened up, and this is not to say that smart contract failures are a thing you should forget about. That's like that would be like a classic survivorship bias kind of fallacy. So it's not what we're trying to imply here in this image, but just to show that when you look at where the losses are coming from in our asset class, from operational losses, it is custody related losses. That's this yellow line. So you can see it's accelerating, and it's greater than the smart contract failures in terms of total losses. And so that sort of shows that picture. And then what we looked at was we took that data and we said, okay, so we see this as a big problem. Who's affected by this? And so this is kind of potentially pretty scary when you look at this. Is just sort of a snapshot of this is roughly like 10 events. And so the point in showing this chart here is just to actually, what I'd like you to focus on is this second column, this type column. So this is the type of entity that was affected. So you see everything from RWA platforms to exchanges, and these are entities that lost funds due to a custody, like some kind of private key failure that caused digital assets to move, basically, right? Move in a way that they didn't move, or potentially not be able to move at all, right? If it's like a disaster recovery kind of issue. So we see everything from RWAs, exchanges, entities that label themselves as neobanks, DeFi, and even the U.S. government was actually involved in some of these events. Heck, and then very relevant to the family office crowd that we have here, Wealth Advisor, RIA. This one's pretty frightening because these guys, Lufkin Advisors, they are. I don't know what the status of the legal proceedings are, but there was legal action taken against these guys because they there were issues in there. This was, if I recall right, this was disaster recovery related. That's actually, I guess, going back to what we were talking about earlier with some of like the big questions you should be asking. I think a big one is like people should pay attention to disaster recovery. Like how they're actually doing that, and how they're verifying that it's up to date and this sort of thing. But anyway, that's really all the data that I have to share here. Big picture, it's a big problem. And who's affected? Pretty much everybody. You're going to do something in digital assets, it's something you have to worry about.
Yeah, I like those examples, and like the prime trust example is something that we talk about in our CCSS courses, because it could have been, maybe it couldn't have been avoided at some point, but money kept being sent into this wallet where there was no access. So it's not like there was money in a wallet and it's like, oh, okay, we realize that this is a problem. We're going to not send money to it anymore. It's like they didn't even notice that. And it went on and on and on and on with more and more money. So as a customer, if you have a company that you're trusting and they say, oh, yep, it's there. The money could continue to go to a place where there's no access and you're continuing to send this without even knowing. It's pretty scary. And, I feel like, well, the standard was created in 2014. So it's been 11 years since this has been going on, or the cryptocurrency standard was created 11 years ago. And yet this year, there were more key losses and a larger amount of money lost than the year before. So it's not getting better. It's getting worse. And so in 2023, it was about 1 million. And then in 2024 is 1.7 million, billion lost due to private key compromises. So almost a billion more. That's kind of a lot of money, at least to me. So I think we've established that there's a problem, and I appreciate you showing that information, Phil, as well. Sherney, did you want to also talk a little bit about this as well, this operational due diligence and what we need to be doing, what we should be paying attention to?
Yes, sure, Jace. I would just like to take a little bit of a step back. We spoke earlier about a bit more of the technical controls, the key compromise policies, the key inventory and things like that. But I think it's always important for due diligence. The first step for me is seeing actually who is the people behind this company, doing basic due diligence risk screens on them, seeing in what project they have been involved in to where they got here. And then also who is really accountable, who takes responsibility in that organization for governance over this key and custody operations. Very important to start that. You can have the best tech and best, security, but it's still the guys that need to live it every day and implement that. So yeah, that's generally where I would start. And then another thing that Mark touched on earlier, that's a very important point for me, and I always slip it into my DDQs, is specifically that vendor or service provider's third-party risk management. Do they have a documented policy? And if I ask, do they have an inventory or list of their critical vendors? Are they classified? Is their owner responsible for that vendor? And generally, if that information is readily available in a clear and structured way, that also gives me a bit more comfort, because you can do the best due diligence or operational due diligence here and then still get hit by someone like 3 layers down the line. So.
I mean, absolutely. This is one of my favorite stories, but it's also horrifying. I was at a conference a few years ago. I was in Chicago, and I went up to somebody and I was asking him about what he does for custody. And he said, oh yeah, well, we have a wallet service provider. We do this with this. And he pointed to another booth down the way. And I said, oh, do you know that they're trusting? And I pointed to another booth, and he was like, oh yeah. And I said, and they're trusting? And I pointed to another one, and he was like, what? His face just dropped. And I thought, you don't know, you're trusting somebody, but you don't know who they're trusting. So it's like going down this line. And he probably felt maybe like he was being nosy, saying, well, who does this? Who does that? And if you're asking so many questions, maybe it feels like you're being too invasive, which I don't think is true when we're talking about millions of dollars. But that really stuck with me. I see you nodding, Mark. Did you want to jump on to that point?
No, I mean, Shanae, again, it's just a really good point, is that, we can get into the weeds of technical controls and so forth, but ultimately, maybe you should just start at the fact that who actually owns the company, and can you find out where their physical address is, and, where are they licensed, where are their clients operating, and so forth. And, part of that would be regulators as well, right? Is there any issues with regulators worldwide? Is there any alerts coming out with warnings about the company or the entity. And the other thing too, I suppose, is how many times do they appear negatively in the news? Or if they're on the, the hacked websites like wrecked.news or Web3 is going great, how many times has this entity been hacked? So definitely, start at the top, as Shanae was saying. It's very important to actually understand who is behind this entity.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that might, if you're coming from a place like TradFi, that might seem like not as important of like maybe there's bigger companies that isn't something that you're asking as much, but we know that that is extremely important in crypto. And I'm going to link to rect.news, and Web3 is going great in the chat. So if anyone isn't familiar with it, you can take a look at it. It gives a lot of examples. It's going to scare the hell out of you if you haven't seen it before, but I highly suggest doing so and looking at it anyways, because it definitely gives a good idea of what is really happening and puts it all together. I think another piece of this is that, we've got all of these companies and there's a breach, and then maybe there's an assumption that it's been fixed, or if there hasn't been an issue in a while, there isn't going to be. And that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes a key is generated years, in fact, years before this wallet is still being used, which could potentially be fine, but it might not be. And if the key's been decommissioned, but the wallet's still open, I mean, what happened with Prime Trust, but there's just, hundreds of examples of this. And I think it's super problematic, which is why we're trying to, work together to solve this problem. So, okay, what else about like operational due diligence that we want to talk about in regards to this before we get into some of the other risk pieces? Do we miss anything?
I would like to add one thing as well. We spoke earlier about, continuous monitoring in the custody providers as well. And I think the periodic reviews or ongoing monitoring of your custodian or the service provider is also very important, because again, that questions you ask in the beginning where you decide to go with them is also based on what's happening today. But you should be aware, or I don't know, think about some incident triggers that is relevant to you, whether it's changes in leadership, infrastructure, service providers, because that changes and that changes your risk. So should continuously be aware of that. And also what you are doing with that custody or service provider. Are you moving more assets through them? That changes the relationship. So now, or the services or other tools we're using from them change. So then we might need to ask some extra questions. So I think ongoing monitoring of your custodians, that's also very important.
Yeah, I think that's good. And that actually also makes me think of like when we talk about the scope of a CCSS audit or the scope of what's being evaluated for risk and the service providers and all of that, you need to not only figure out what's going on in that original company, but the other service providers, but also what if a service provider is bought out by a different company and then they're less secure? And I imagine this isn't something I do, but how do you even keep track of all of that when you're asking these questions, when you're trying to evaluate for risk? What do you do to track all of these things? Because it seems like that would be a lot to pay attention to. So is this where auditors come in? Is this where consultants come in, or internal due diligence? Where should people be going? What should they be looking for?
There are tools. Some of my clients use tools that actually monitor their service providers. And these tools are actually, because some of them are quite sophisticated. Not only do they monitor the endpoints, that they might be using, like API endpoints and so forth for vulnerabilities, but they also monitor social media and press releases and all that type of stuff to actually to be alerted when their service provider ends up in the news, because ultimately at some stage the marketing department might want to get a bit excited that they've actually changed wallet infrastructure providers. But the entity actually doesn't tell their customers that they've changed the wallet infrastructure providers. But going back to what Phil was saying is that obviously the funds have to move. So there's little things like that. So there are tools out there where you can monitor your service providers. And you can also send out questionnaires. Like every month you can send out a questionnaire saying, you know, have you had an incident in the last month, or has anyone left, or has any key custodians been removed, you know, had their privileges revoked and so forth. So there are some quite sophisticated tools out there as well.
Okay, so I think we have an idea about this part of it, but I guess the next question, and Andrew, maybe you can talk about this a little bit, is we know that some services have to be outsourced. Most companies are using additional service providers, and it's not all in-house. But so if we know that this is happening, and some of it is a way to reduce risk, but it increases risk, how can we outsource risk? What does this look like, Andrew?
Sure. Thanks, Jessica. And there are certainly tools that you can use to, monitor your vendors. But I think the short answer for can you fully outsource risk, cybersecurity risk, or any other sort of risk is simply no, right? There's always some residual risk, even if you use a fully managed solution for custody. That would be something like Fidelity Digital, Coinbase Prime, Anchorage Digital. These companies promise to fully manage your keys. They fully manage, all the hardware and software that's related to it, the interface that you would use to access your cryptocurrency. But guess what? You still have to determine who within your company has access, right? Has a user account at Anchorage Digital. So we call this in traditional cybersecurity IAM, identity and access management. And no matter what kind of software or service you're buying, whether that be a cloud service or a custody provider, at the end of the day, you as the company have to manage the users who are allowed to use that service, right? So who do you trust? Going back to that idea of, trust comes down to people, right? Who within your company are vetted to be, the custodians who are allowed to log into that custody provider. So that's in a fully managed custody model. There's also co-managed custody, right? These are going to be your solutions such as Fireblocks, BitGo, Multisig, Copper, where they're typically using multi-party compute solutions, which means that you will have a piece of the wallet that you control and that you can generate signing keys, but it has to be combined with the wallet that the provider controls, and then maybe a third provider, for example, your lawyer or some other entity. And 2 out of the 3 or 3 out of the 5 have to sign off on a transaction, right? Now, in this instance, you have a little bit more responsibility than the fully managed custody, right? But it's also more secure. It also means that you don't have to fully trust the custody provider because they alone cannot sign for transactions unilaterally, right? So you're removing a little bit of trust from the custody provider, and then you're adding more responsibility to yourself. So again, that shared responsibility model works both ways. The less responsibility you're giving to someone else, the more you're taking on. And of course, lastly, you have self-managed custody. This is going to be, you fully manage the keys, right? Either you're using a hardware solution, you're using some sort of smart contract, and this is like your traditional on-prem data center, right? You fully manage everything. That means you have full responsibility. That means you have to have the skills and expertise within your own company, to do all of that. So yeah, there's different ways to, outsource portions of risk, but I think the biggest factor here is to understand that even with a fully managed custody solution, you're still responsible for the identity and access management part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And this just popped into my head too. Like for many, many years, we've always been saying like self-custody is the way to go. But I think that with new certifications, new audits, that it changes the risk profile a little bit about this, but also self-custody has a different risk, which is physical and personal risk for those who are holding it. And I don't want to scare everyone, but if you look at the news, you probably see a lot of scary things. But so we're weighing risks on both sides of it, or I guess all sides of it. Mark, did you want to comment on that?
Oh no, it's I mean, Andrew summed it up pretty good.
Okay.
I don't. I mean, yeah, you can't someone's ultimately you can't outsource accountability, right, for your risk as well. The other thing that just came to mind too is one of the things to look for in a custody provider is what do they actually do with your funds? It just popped into my head, like do they do what the banks do, like fractional reserve, like they actually grab your funds and they do something with them to earn additional profit? Seems quite logical that they wouldn't, but that's probably something that I would ask as well, is what do they actually do to your funds once you put them into their wallets?
Yeah, and playing off of that, that's a really good point, Mark. Like, what are they doing with those funds? And usually, what where we see like the challenge there is with things that look like credit style instruments, or even like these like off exchange settlement solutions. Usually, like the ability of these, whether we're talking about like an instrument that looks like a credit style instrument, like a derivative or something like this, or an off exchange settlement solution, all of these kind of look like credit style things. And this will like making this relevant to like the family office crowd here. And then what you run into oftentimes is like this problem of like there's some legal structure that is set up to like, lay the foundation of that credit style instrument, and like the ability of that credit instrument to then settle so you get your money back, or you have to pay, depending on what side of the profit and loss you're on. But then there's this like really interesting element particular to digital assets, which is the technical element, which is like, okay, yeah, you have this, this legal fiction set up to, get lawyers involved, but then like technically are things actually established in a way where like or settlement will actually occur, where perhaps it's in the case of say a recourse loan, like with the prime broker. Andrew, you mentioned some of these like prime brokerage entities. Are they offering some kind of like credit instrument to their underlying funds? If they are, how can they recover those assets? Can they technically recover them? Like, is there some sort of control that they technically have? Because when you as family office allocating into a hedge fund, or you're running a hedge fund and you're interacting with this suite of digital asset prime brokers, or OTC desks, whatever they might be, you then effectively become exposed to the counterparty risk of all of their other clients, right? If they were to blow up, if they had a position that blew up. And now you have to know, okay, yeah, legally this makes sense, but technically, will this actually work in a black swan scenario? Will I technically have the ability to get my funds back? And that's actually like it's actually pretty tricky in our asset class, right? Because it's like we're sort of trying to replicate old world TradFi structures, but then we have this whole new set of infrastructure that's required to make sure it operates appropriately, and so you can get your money.
Yeah, there was something with a big exchange, medium-sized exchange a couple of years ago, Gemini, where you could stake your Gemini USD with them, and you might have just thought, okay, I trust Gemini, that's the end of it. Well, Gemini trusted Genesis, and then the funds, they were gone. So the point is, who are you trusting to then trust what it is? And then how do we evaluate what they're doing? And then how do we like move forward when something like that happens? Because it's very different in crypto than it is in TradFi. And then also, who's responsible for it? And is there insurance to cover this? Did you work with a company that will reimburse you for it? Do they have the ability to do that? And what does that look like? So should we also be asking about insurance providers and, what happens if there is a key compromise?
Are they insured? and how much too. I don't think some of these underwriters will underwrite a platform for billions of dollars. I vaguely remember seeing somewhere that there's a cap normally of, I can't remember, but something like 250 million or something, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, I don't know if these underwriters can extend to the huge amounts of funds that they're dealing with here as well.
Right. So they might only cover a portion of what is lost because there's so much value with some of these. And also the other side of it is, if it's a stable coin and you say, okay, we can insure you up to, $1 million, and there's $1 million, but what if it's in Bitcoin or Ether or something that fluctuates, and suddenly your crypto is no longer worth, $1 million, but $1 billion, and then it disappears? What then? Does your insurance policy cover that? Yeah, Phil?
Yeah. Also, in those insurance policies, like what's actually covered, what events. Oftentimes terrorism is carved out. Oftentimes, state actors are carved out as events that are not paid out on. And North Korea is a pretty big actor in our space, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
So how much will they cover? In what cases will be covered? What if the price skyrockets? Does the policy change in some way? Is it written in? And remember, this isn't necessarily your insurance policy. This is the insurance policy of the company you're using, or potentially the company that you're using's company that they're using, right? So the service providers. So there's a lot of questions to be asking about that as well. So can we talk for a moment about like transferring responsibility and accountability? Who is responsible? How do we hold people accountable for this, so that, we can try to ask all of the right questions? And I hope that this stream gave those listening some ideas for how to do that. But how do we really decide who is responsible, and how to hold people accountable for holding on to our crypto assets, or the assets we're holding for others? Who do we blame, or should we not blame people? We're just this kind, loving community where everything's okay.
I think regulations probably helped in this space somewhat. I mean, I remember going to conferences 2 years ago where everyone was talking about to the moon, the big conferences and all the big keynote speakers and stuff, and talking about how fantastic this space is and so forth. And then, then you have the major hacks, obviously. And then all suddenly the conferences you go to these days is talking about, we love regulation, right? We got to have regulation in this sector. I think the regulators are actually doing good in a lot of this space, because they are putting in place controls to hold people or entities accountable for these types of things as well. So I would definitely consider whether these entities have licenses in the jurisdictions that you deal with, or your own clients deal with as well, because there's always this fuzzy thing of, if you're a family office, or even if your clients are family offices, where are they based, and what regulations are they involved with, and then where does the funds end up? Do they end up in some other area of the world, and are those sanctioned? And there's a whole lot of all the sanction stuff and regulations that needs to be interpreted here as well. I mean, obviously this is when you start pulling in the lawyers and so forth, but I think regulations have helped somewhat in terms of making people accountable in this space.
Well, I will say one of the things we're doing at C4 and with our cryptocurrency security standard is, it is community driven. We have people like on this call who help form what should be part of this key management standard, and try to figure out how to make the space as safe as possible with this. So we have that, happening. But sorry, Andrew, did you want to jump in?
Oh, yeah. I just want to add in from what Mark is saying. I think regulation definitely helps with holding people accountable, right, when they mess up. But I think at the end of the day, I've been working in the cryptocurrency space for a long time, and I've seen regulations certainly helping, but certainly not stopping cyber threats and incidents from happening. So at the end of the day, I think it's a buyer beware situation. As a family office, or if you are just a high net worth individual looking at doing crypto custody, yes, you can sue them. You can maybe take them to court if they mess up. But at the end of the day, you're the one who, lost out on your crypto assets if they were hacked, right? So I think ultimately it's a buyer beware situation. I think it's great that we're having more regulation in this space, that we are creating these standards such as CCSS that can be followed on a voluntary basis, and that you can use as a sort of benchmark. But yeah, I think you definitely need to do your homework when it comes to evaluating the compliance of these custody providers that you're entrusting.
Right. And with, the CCSS, I know has been written into some different frameworks and it's being presented to different monetary authorities. And what we'd like to see more of is we already have something that protects, yes, it's this niche, part of it, key management. It's not everything, but we have it and it's been created by people who are actually in the space, who are using cryptographic keys and are managing them. And so we want to see things that work for this industry be put into regulation, rather regulation determining what should work for the industry, which might not. Obviously, we need to follow rules and comply with, regulations in the different jurisdictions. But I think that it is beneficial to everyone in this industry for us to be building our own standards and trying to work with and guide with what already makes sense, rather than kind of trying to jump through new hoops when we already have some ideas of what works. Okay, we are coming towards the end. Does anybody have any closing comments, questions they want to bring up? Anything we haven't covered? No, this was perfect. I knew it was going to be perfect. Shorty, did you want to say anything?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, I'm going to quickly do like a run through of some questions that to be asking. Ask about how the keys are generated, what's happening with the entropy behind it. Is there multi-signature being used? How's the key material being stored? How do we know if it is being accessed in a safe way? Who has access to it? Are there security tests, audits? What type of backups, redundancy, logging, monitoring? Who's trusting who? Who's in charge? Who's being held accountable? Is there insurance? That was just sort of a word vomit situation. And hopefully you got a bunch of other questions from the rest of this that you can also ask. But I guess I would say bottom line is don't be afraid to ask the questions. Going in blindly trusting is not the way to stay safe in this space. So ask the questions that are needed. And if you don't know what questions to ask for your system, your product, go to the experts. Really, it is worth it to get that assurance and to ask people who know what type of due diligence to do and where to go. So thank you for joining. I know this is a serious topic, but it's super important. And it's one of the things that we need to fix in the crypto industry for sure. So thank you guys for joining. I so appreciate you being here. I hope that this helped everyone who is listening. And any closing remarks? All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye,
Jess. Thanks, everybody.